Okay, so here's the Spanish reaction to the chicken war. Um, they get serious, very serious about settling Texas in the sense of at least establishing uh, a, a strong footprint in Texas, which, by the way, still exists to this very day. So, like I've said in my class, two things are true about Spanish Texas. One, the Spanish never had many people. They were never able to populate Spanish Texas to any great degree. But number two is even so, the Spanish were not able to populate Texas to any great degree. The Spanish legacy in Texas is still quite profound. You know, the Catholic Church, the missions. I think every river, major river except for the Red River, it has a Spanish name. A bunch of the roads have Spanish names. Um, uh, there's just especially, you don't feel Spain, I don't think, as much in places like Houston and Austin and Dallas, but you certainly feel that Spanish presence in downtown San Antonio, which is one of the things that really gives San Antonio its charm. So the Spanish, after the Chicken War, what they do is they appoint the governor of Coahuila, who is a guy by the name of Marquis de San Miguel de Aguayo, and that is going to be on the outline that I'm going to send you. Aguayo is someone you have to know who that person is. It's very important to me that you leave this course understanding and knowing who Aguayo is, because what he is he's the Spanish founder of Texas. He comes up into Texas, as I'll talk about in a second, after the Chicken War of the 17, the Chicken War of 1719 or so. He's charged with coming up and really establishing a Spanish presence in Texas. So he is a very important, although often forgotten figure in Texas history, but he's the guy that lays down the permanent Spanish presence in Texas, okay? Aguayo. You have to know who he is. So he was the governor and the captain general of Coahuila y Tejas. And when he's appointed in 1719, and by that time, there's only one mission and one presidio in Texas, and that's in San Antonio because the French had skedaddled out of East Texas. And so he was charged, Aguayo was, by the viceroy in Mexico City to come into Texas and to reestablish a Spanish presence in Texas. Guaya was a very wealthy man. He owned half of the province of Coahuila, which is kind of incredible if you think about it. So what happens is Aguayo comes up in 1720 and he returns in he comes up from Coahuila in 1720 and he returns from in 1722. Okay, I know for a lot of you these dates are killers. They're history killers, but just get a sense of the sequence. That's the big thing. The decades. Um, uh, that's important, and if so, just get a sense of the sequence. So here's the sequence. The Spanish, after San Denis shows up in San Juan Bautista, decide that they want to come back into Texas. They established Las Ideas and a couple of missions in East Texas, and as a part of this initiative, they established San Antonio in 1718. A year later, they get kicked out of East Texas, and the only Spanish presence in the Chicken War, and the only Spanish presence in Texas is in San Antonio. And then the next year, in 1720, Aguayo comes up, and the big picture about Aguayo is that what he represents is the Spanish government's most serious attempt and most successful attempt to establish a firm foothold in Texas. Okay, that's the big picture with this guy Aguayo, and he comes up after the Chicken War of 1719. So, what he does, and it's not too much to say that Aguayo secures Texas for Spain. That's not a small thing. That's not a small thing. It's a very important moment in Texas history. So he comes up, it takes him a year to kind of get his act together because this is the real deal now. It's not going to be half-assed like a lot of these expeditions. And he's given a lot of money, he's given a lot of resources, and he takes his time. This is a serious guy. Aguayo is a very, very serious guy who's charged with a serious mission to secure the Spanish presence in Texas. You're not going to need to know the exact details of what I'm going to say next, but just get a sense. So he comes up into Spanish Texas with 500 men, which is far more than the Spanish had ever brought into Texas at any one time. It's a small number in a lot of ways, but given how the Spanish had kind of ignored Texas up until this point, 500 men, that's a serious number of men. 3,600 horses, and again, I'm not going to test you on the number of horses. What I'm trying to get across to you is how serious this Aguayo's mission is. Okay, he's bringing some serious resources and manpower and materiel into Texas for the first time. So 500 men or so, 3,600 horses, 600 cattle. Again, important. This is going to reinforce the cattle industry in Texas. Mules that came up with supplies, sheep, goats, that kind of a thing. And he comes up, he crosses the Rio Grande. He comes up into the area near where La Salle had just 20 or 30 years before, where the failed La Salle colony was. And on that point, he establishes the mission La Bahia, and La Bahia is Goliad. So one of the important successes of Aguayo is he establishes a mission in southeast Texas, a community that still exists to this very day, which is Goliad. It begins with La Bahia, and but now we call it Goliad. So make note of that. Goliad is established as part of this Aguayo mission in 1720, 1722. He goes up into East Texas. He reestablishes missions in East Texas. By the time he leaves Texas, Aguayo has established 10 missions, 4 presidios, and he leaves about 300 Spaniards, mostly soldiers, in Texas, including some with families. Remember, this was kind of the idea that the Spanish wanted soldiers to bring their families with them because they wanted them to stay in Texas, Spanish Texas, after their term of service was up, because the Spanish are desperate to settle Texas and to populate Texas. So he also goes into San Antonio. He reinforces San Antonio. He leaves a couple of dozen soldiers in San Antonio. And he returns to Mexico in 1722. And he never comes back to Texas after 1722. He's up here for 2 years, establishes 10 missions, reinforces the mission in San Antonio, creates what becomes Goliad, Las Ideas, it becomes Spanish again, and then he's gone. He's back to his land in Coahuila, and he never comes back. But big picture, it's the Aguayo expedition that cements the Spanish presence in Texas, which had been very, very shaky up until this point. And he comes up with hundreds of men, which was a major deal because the Spanish had never really devoted many resources to Texas. And by the time he leaves, Texas is in much better shape vis-a-vis a Spanish presence. He leaves around 300 soldiers, families. He reestablishes the capital, reinforces San Antonio. And so once he leaves, the Spanish have a footprint in Texas that they're not going to lose for 100 years. And what happens is in 1821, Mexico becomes an independent country and Spain is kicked out of North America. So Aguayo is the guy that nails down the Spanish presence in Texas. very important for this course, a very, very significant figure in Texas history.